project and part 2 of the RX8 budget drift build. In this episode we're going to put everything back together. For those that didn't watch the first episode, I got a 2004 RX8 that had some front end damage. I got it for $2,400, 1860 US. Great compression on the motor, just under 120 psi on all phases, but some front end damage. So now it's time to fix the damage. So I wanted to try to get the parts as cheap as I could. I started locally. I went to the local U-Pick, or pick and pull we call it here, and I found this car. And I was able to get a number of parts off this, and first and foremost was the steering rack that needed to be replaced. So I got the steering rack at the pick and pull for $50, which I was pretty happy about. That's even a $10 core charge, so I could bring back the old rack, but I decided to keep it just in case. I don't know. I'm not sure that this one is no good. I don't know if I can change the ends on it. I'm not sure, but decided to keep it anyway. When installing the steering rack, initially I tried to support the weight with a jack, but it turns out it's just easier to just lay underneath and just push it up. It actually wasn't that heavy or too clumsy to just get up underneath it. You want to start with the passenger side lower bolt already put into the steering rack, because it's really tight there with the rad hose. So if you start with the bolt already in the rack, when you slide it up, once you fit that bolt in, you want to just get that one threaded on a little bit, and then you need to line up the steering shaft, or I should say the steering column shaft. Line those splines up with the universal for the input on the steering column, or on the steering rack. It only fits in the universal one way. There's one big spline, so you can't clock it the wrong way, but you do want to make sure that your steering wheel is in fact centered, so it's the same amount of spins one way or the other, and that your two tie rod ends are about the same distance out on each side, so that you're not off a full turn, which you could install it that way and it would be a real pain because you'd have to take it all the way out in order to fix that. I read in some videos that you need to do the wiring from above and remove the airbox. It's not necessary. You can do it all from underneath. Might be a little hard to tell when you're reaching up under the car, but you got to remove this little 10mm bolt. That's your ground. And then this clip here can be a bit tricky. The part that's marked in white is where you press, right here, not right here. But from underneath the car it's kind of hard to tell, and you can push on that a whole bunch and get no luck. You push on there, it's pretty easy. Once you get the rack installed, you can go ahead and reinstall the lower rad brackets that you need to remove in order to get it up. The rad still seems to be plenty supported. Taking out the brackets, the rad didn't even move, so you don't need to worry about draining fluid or moving the rad or anything like that. I decided to leave the tie rods as they were. I should have freed them up, because I learned after when I went to the alignment shop that they were seized, and it would have been easier to free those up when it was off the car or at the time of the install. I decided to just leave them where they were. Figured they would be close enough as they were for the other car. One of the tie rod ends just kept spinning when I was trying to tighten the bolt, so I just put a little pressure underneath it with a jack and it tightened up fine. Not sure if that's a known thing or not, but it worked. The one side I was able to just push up by hand and get it enough that it was able to tighten down, but the other side I had used the jack, and it made it pretty easy. So next up, I had to replace the brake rotor. Now the front brake rotors were actually replaced within the last year according to the previous owner, and they seemed to be pretty much brand new. So I just replaced the one side that was damaged. Locally, the cheapest I could get a brake rotor for was $110. Rock Auto, I was able to get it shipped from the States. It was $25 for the rotor and $25 shipping. So for $50, I got a new rotor. Doesn't make sense to me why it would be so much more on the shelf around the corner, but Rock Auto was where it was at. It did take about a week or so to get, but that was okay because I was waiting on some other things as well. So note, the RX8 uses 2 set screws to hold the rotor in place. It doesn't just float like most cars. The little set screws don't come with the new rotor. I'm not sure what they cost separately, and they're a Phillips head, so it's easy to strip. If you can, use an impact driver to remove them, or heat if they don't come out easily, because it's pretty easy to strip them. Fortunately, I was able to get spares from the scrapyard to cover me in the future. However, I was able to get them off without stripping them because I used the impact driver. Next up, I gotta fix this mess. Now, the car had the pick and pull. I just went ahead, I brought my cordless grinder with me, and I'm not sure if that was allowed, but I went ahead and did it anyway. And I cut this whole section off that I needed. So I'm gonna go ahead, I already trimmed this where I want it, and I've made some marks on here. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim this, and then I'm going to fit it just up here and tack it. And then I'm actually gonna bolt on my fender, because some of this could have got crumpled. There's a few signs of a little bit of crumpling up here. So I want to line the fender up, and the fender bolts on over here, or here, one of these. So I'm actually going to line the fender up with the hood, bolt it on there, and then that'll determine where I tack it up here and how much I need to straighten this out to fit it here. I started by just tacking it in place, and then I fit the fender, closed the hood, opened the hood, adjust the fender, close the hood, etc., etc. After doing that a few times, I realized that the door alignment was just shit. So I just used some tongue depressors for panel gap. 2 tongue depressors was the panel gap on the passenger side. So I just taped 2 together, taped them in place, closed the door with those in place, and then loosened the hinges on the front and retightened them. And that got the gap back to the same as the passenger side. So then I was able to reinstall the fender, and then close the hood and lift the hood and tighten down the fender and close the hood and check the fitment until I was finally happy with where the fender sat. Now where the headlight bracket lined up under the fender, I left a little extra material because I wasn't sure how much it was going to need to be bent up. So I had to trim that, and then I jacked it up with a 2x4 in place, so I was able to clamp it and then tack that. Then I was able to remove the fender and then finish welding everything up. Any welds that were going to be visible once everything was installed, I ground them smooth as if they were never there, but left the extra weld reinforcement on the inside, with the exception of the factory spot welds, which also got covered up by the fender. I just did those in the same location as the original spot welds. Now with the welding, I was using 035 wire, which anyone that does bodywork will tell you that's way too thick a wire to use. I think it's just because I'm a welder by trade, I'm stubborn, or maybe because I'm a welder by trade, I should or because I do it for a living, I should probably know better and have switched a wire. I may actually have some here. I was just stubborn. The wire was in the machine and I was convinced I could do it, and I did. Basically, once I had some weld started, the weld was actually the thickest part there, so I was able to just keep building up on the weld. So it looks like I'm just tacking, but I'm just, letting that puddle cool and then filling it and cool and fill it and cool and fill it. So I just call it just triggering it in, and just, a little bit at a time. But the steel never really cools off. It's still red, and then I'm adding a little more. If I was to just pull the trigger and go, it would just burn a hole through. So it actually worked pretty good. I thought it was going to probably go to shit and I would have to switch to wire, but I wanted to try it as it was, and it worked out fine for me. Might not be for everyone. I would recommend at least an 030 or an 023 would probably be more ideal for doing body work or any thin sheet metal. So it was at this point I was able to locate a OEM wheel and tire locally. I got it for what I thought was a good deal at $100. The tire was in good shape, wheel was mint. So I got a little eager, so I decided to go ahead and since I had the brakes and the steering all done, I wanted to drive the car. So I installed the wheel and tire, and then I took it for a quick little spin around the block. That was enough motivation to keep going with the build. There was no major issues on the quick spin around the block, so now, well, at some point I'd like to install like a crash bar in the front. Not really sure what they're called, but like the bumper support, crash bar, jacking point that most drift cars have. The bumper support I got for $26. I got that off the car at the pick and pull. It was just 8 bolts, took it off myself. Super easy to just get that out of the way, because it's something I'd have to spend probably close to $500 by the time I got one shipped here, or I could make one, but for $26 I can do it later. And I just installed the factory one. So I forgot to mention the fender. The fender I paid a little more than I would have liked. It was at a local like used parts spot, like where they pull the parts themselves, so you can't come in and do it. $200, but I didn't want to mismatch color, and they had one in silver. It was local, right there, ready to pick up, no shipping cost. So $200, I forked over for that. They also had a silver bumper there that had some damage on it. I didn't even look at the damage. It was almost $500, and it was damaged, so I wasn't interested. So I offset what I thought was an expensive fender with the cheapest bumper I could find, which was at the pick and pull, just thrown in the dirt underneath or on the side of the car. I got that for $50, but it needed a little bit of fixing. So this is what I'm fixing today. This is actually the inside where the hood would close right here. So what I'm fixing actually wouldn't be seen, but it's required to have some rigidity on the top part of the bumper where that Mazda symbol is, so it's not sagging down, so it lines up with the hood. So it was only connected right here. I already glued this section on, and then I'm gonna do this section now, and I'm basically just using Gorilla super glue, putting a little bit on the seam, which I sanded down with some 40 grit and cleaned up with some wax and grease remover. So I'm just putting down about 6 inches, holding it for a few minutes until it holds, and then doing another bit more. And it's working so far. The plan is to then use, I got some Gorilla Glue epoxy, which is like a 2-part epoxy, is mix that up and actually just do like a bead on the inside and give it a little more strength, because this little bit of crazy glue probably wouldn't hold up too much. But it is, fairly rigid and holding the shape, which is good. So I'll mount these steel brackets on here so it's holding the shape, and then I'll just fill up that little V from the inside with some more glue, and hopefully that holds. So there we have it. You can't see at all from up here that it was repaired, besides still a little bit of pesky tape I haven't managed to get off. The bumper is in terrible shape. I'm hoping with a bit of cleaning and a bit of like that scratch repair wax, it looks presentable. Got a Mazda symbol I can put over this from the other bumper. I don't think I have 2 of these. I have this one for sure, but this one I think was lost in the accident. I never got one with this bumper, but it's a bumper for a drift car. So while the headlight needs to go in before the bumper, the headlight was 2-3 weeks out. I gave up trying to find one locally and ended up ordering one off eBay, and it took almost 3 weeks to get. So I decided to go ahead and install the bumper, and it sat basically like this for a couple of weeks. I drove it around the block a little bit, but I didn't want to get too much attention. It's one thing to have a headlight burnt out. It's another thing to be driving around with no headlight. And in Canada, we have to have the headlights on all the time. They're daytime running lights. So you can even get a ticket for it in broad daylight, which is stupid, but that's just the way it is. So the headlight off eBay finally came in. I got that for $225. That included shipping and customs or duties. The best I could do was almost $500 anywhere locally. So I just bit the bullet and waited the 3 weeks for that to come in. The marker light was actually a lot cheaper at Mazda. It would have cost me like $75 with shipping by the time I got one from eBay, because everything was coming from the US, so like minimum shipping is like $25 US. So I was able to get it for $45 next day at Mazda. So this is how the car is sitting today. Looks pretty good in my opinion. I did remove the plasti dip from the wheels. was a real shit job. There was lots of runs in it, and it was just faded and looked like crap. And the new wheel didn't have the plastic tube on it, and I didn't care for the wheels. In black, there's a little bit of gap between the fender and the hood. The hood is bent, and I couldn't straighten it out any better than it is. But I think it's acceptable. It looks fine from a distance, unless it's pointed out, I think. So total cost for the car, as it sits, it's licensed, it's insured, very drivable, drives fine. Got a few little minor issues we'll get into in the future, but total cost is $3,161, so $2,500 US. And the motor, recently reinstalled a new motor from Mazda, not a remanufactured one apparently. And the compression backs that up. It's got perfect compression. It dries great. For under $2,500 US, I mean, the motor alone is worth that. So I can't argue with that. I got a few minor issues with the car aesthetically, but mechanically it's great. The next episode we'll talk about driving it. The few minor issues I need to fix. I got, as soon as I installed the one new headlight, the other headlight stopped working, and I think that's because I'm using a US headlight for the driver's side versus the Canadian headlight, and there's a daytime running light system in there, so I've got to troubleshoot that because the one headlight worked fine. The turn signal works fine on the passenger side, and the headlight and high beam worked fine before. And as soon as I plugged in the driver's side one, it stopped working. So I'm sure it's something to do with incompatibility. I'm going to see if I can just disable the whole daytime running light thing, or bypass the module or something like that. I've got an ABS light. That's a sensor that I forget the code now, but I guess it's a common issue. So for now, I don't have any ABS or traction control, but that's okay. I got an airbag light that may or may not. I'm sure it's related to the crash. I'm not sure exactly where the issue is yet. It could also be from beforehand because there's known issues with the connection. So I think I'll narrow down. I think there's one underneath the seat that could cause it. What else? The steering wheel controls don't work. That is quite possibly the common issue of the clock spring, or possibly related to the crash. Again, not sure. Some of these things aren't big issues to me. I mean, I'm going to weld the diff, so the traction control and ABS thing, it's probably never going to work for me anyway. I don't know if the ABS could still work, but certainly traction control won't work if the diff's welded, I wouldn't think. I have sat in the car with the helmet on, and I need a lower seat, and preferably a more supportive seat. So I'm probably going to be installing a bucket seat, in which case I won't be using the airbags in the seat, so the airbag light's probably going to have to stay on. And I'm on the fence about installing an aftermarket steering wheel. Generally, in my opinion, if you're removing the factory seat, that's the time to change the steering wheel as well. This whole system is designed, the 3-point harness, the factory seat, the factory steering wheel airbag, that's a system all designed together. If you start changing, one of those elements, you might as well change them all. So there's a good chance that a lot of these issues are not going to get fixed. They're just going to get replaced with aftermarket, and I'll never have to worry about it. And then I'll just have to, whenever I get an aftermarket ECU, turn all those annoying lights off on the dash. But the car drives just fine. We'll get into that in the next video. More detail and just drive the car, and then the plans for modifying it. I've already picked up some parts. I got more parts ordered, more parts planned to order. But we'll get to that in the next RX8 video. The first video was all filmed in one day, taking the car apart, and I think it was maybe 2 or 3 days putting the car back together, and then just took a month for me to do this little recap. So if you like what I'm doing here with this channel, you got any ideas for drifting the RX8, you got a good name maybe for the RX8, a custom plate idea, any feedback, always welcome. Until next time, guys, peace. There's a fire burn the fire brigade. So tonight we are losing this fight. Oh, so tonight.